ahead and get started. I know we're a small group right now. We'll let people trickle in, but there's a lot of material to cover. So today we have 3 people here from the Dependency-Domestic Violence Clinic. I'm going to introduce Allison Messenger, who's then going to introduce our other speakers. Allison is the managing staff attorney at Genesee, and they bring with them a wealth of knowledge and experience, so I'm really looking forward to this presentation.
Good afternoon. On behalf of Genesee Center, we are so excited to be here with you today. As the managing staff attorney at Genesee Center, I have the privilege of overseeing our legal services program, which provides direct legal services to our residential and drop-in clients, as well as members of the public through our domestic violence clinic at the Inglewood Courthouse. Many are surprised to learn that even in 2019, Genesee Center is one of the few domestic violence intervention programs in Los Angeles that has its own fully developed in-house legal services program with 3 full-time staff attorneys, 9 legal advocates and paralegals, and a growing list of pro bono attorneys. Our legal services program is just one of the many things that we feel makes Genesee Center unique, and you'll learn about some more during the course of the presentation. Founded in 1980 by 5 African American women who were all friends and bonded by their common experiences with domestic violence, Genesee Center is an example of the tremendous difference that grassroots advocacy can make. And as we approach our 40th anniversary, we are grateful for opportunities like this to share some of our lessons learned and best practices, and to learn from our partners like LADL. After 39 years of doing this work and counting, we know that domestic violence is a community issue whose causes are many, and that it requires a multidisciplinary, multi-agency, comprehensive service approach. In short, all of us in this room and those listening via Skype have a role to play in confronting this scourge we call domestic violence. And with that, I'm honored to introduce 2 of my amazing colleagues at Genesee Center, Dr. Angela Parker, our Director of Trainings and Programs, and Charmin Davis, our Director of Behavioral Health Services and a marriage and family therapist. And they're going to present today on the topic, Understanding the Dynamics of Domestic Violence and Supporting Survivors. And with that, Dr. Parker, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Okay, I sound good. So what I always like to do when we do these particular presentations is sort of lay a groundwork about domestic violence, because everybody sort of has a sense of what it is, but sometimes I think it's good to really unpack it and take a look at it. So as Allison mentioned,
There you go. Yeah, face it up.
So Allison kind of went over the basics of who we are and what we do. We've been around for almost 40 years. We are the oldest domestic violence intervention program in South LA, and we were actually founded by 5 Black women to service Black women, because as you can imagine, in 1980 there were very few shelters that were servicing Black women, and there were no shelters in South LA. So we have always taken what we call sort of a grassroots approach, and from the very beginning, we've considered ourselves to be culturally relevant. Our philosophy is that domestic violence is a family issue. Women and children are our primary clients, however, we do service men. We also service transgender clients. Our families receive culturally sensitive and culturally competent services. We believe that children are equal victims of domestic violence. Families must receive more than shelter, and this is important because this is actually what makes Genesee unique. We believe that if you house someone for like 30 days, 60 days, even for up to 2 years, which is what we do, if we don't provide them programs and services to get back on their feet, they're going to fall right back into this destructive cycle. Also, we work very hard to transform victims into survivors, and we will work with clients who no other DV shelter would work with. Clients that have attitude issues, clients that might have legal issues, clients who may have certain sort of mental health issues or substance abuse issues. We will take teenage boys. We're one of the only domestic violence intervention programs that will do that. And so we really, really believe that in helping people who are in need, our clients tend to be what is referred to as unserved and underserved, which means they have a lifetime of traumatic experiences behind them. This might be their 5th domestic violence situation. They might have been sex trafficked. They might have come out of foster care. They might have been chronically homeless. They might have, 5 children, right, and only be like 22 years old. They might have finished 6th grade. They might have never held down a job. And so it is really our task to make sure that when they leave us, they have the skills they need to be independent. These are some of our programs and services that we offer: case management, vocational education, and we're really big on that because we really believe that having a job is great, having a career is better. And so a lot of our clients come in and they consider themselves to be hustlers, right? To have all these skills hustling, and we help them turn that into a business and get a business license and really kind of be independent and make their own money that way. We do everything on site, so we have an on-site mental health. We do vocational educations and trainings, legal services, which Allison talked about, children and adolescent enrichment programs, and of course we really focus a lot on clients' health because a lot of times they've been in the DV situation and they haven't taken care of their own health. All right, so this is our service model. You call our hotline, but somebody answers 24 hours, 7 days a week. Then we do an intake with the client, and so kind of what we do is a partnership. So we never say, this is what you need to do. Like, we're really big on meeting our clients where they are, and so when we do an intake, it helps us decide which type of counseling they need, what type of legal services they need, what type of shelter services they need, what health, vocational, children's services, etc. And then of course we have our data services where the money is because we have to capture everything that we're doing. All right, and so now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what does an abusive relationship look like. So I'm going to throw it out to you. What do you think an abusive relationship looks like? Anybody?
It's the power and control.
Right, power and control. Any other thoughts?
Physical.
Physical, right? That's the big one that people think about.
Verbal.
Verbal, right?
Emotional.
Emotional.
Financial.
Financial. Oh, you guys are good. See, you're not cheating, right? You're not looking through the... Okay, fantastic. All right, so as you pointed out, an abusive relationship looks like more than one thing, right? And I want to throw out some statistics. 1 in 4 women in their lifetime is abused. 1 in 7 men in their lifetime is abused. More than half of all Americans know someone who has been involved in a violent relationship, either as a victim or an abuser. Nearly 1 in 18 men have been stalked by an intimate partner to the point where they were scared for their safety or the safety of their loved ones. 52% of female murder victims are killed by their partners. Over 4 million women are assaulted by husbands and boyfriends each year, and an estimated 5% of male homicide victims are killed by their intimate partners annually. And also, I also want to always let people know that violence does not discriminate, because a lot of times people have in their mind like what a domestic violence victim looks like, right? Or what an abuser looks like. And that's just not the case. Violence doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what your race is, what your gender is, what your age is, what your sexual orientation is, what your economic status, level of education, religion. You can fall prey to domestic violence. But does anybody have an idea why most people who tend to be in a lower economic status end up at shelters?
Lack of resources?
Lack of resources, right? That is the big one, lack of resources. So just remember that a lot of times what's the difference between someone who has been a victim of domestic violence, who may have a higher education and make more money, and somebody maybe, who lives on the street, is that they don't have access to resources where they can go somewhere safe. All right, so intimate partner violence. The definition for that is a pattern of abusive behaviors where a partner exerts power and control over someone they're dating or involved with in some type of intimate relationship. Are there any words that stick out to you when you see this in this definition? I'll give you a hint. Somebody said it earlier.
Power and control.
Power and control. Ding, 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 ding. You guys are brilliant. Brilliant. And so that's the thing. So that is the difference a lot of times between domestic violence or intimate partner violence, and I'm going to use those words interchangeably, and a healthy relationship. You know, everybody's relationships are different, right? So if you guys are partners, like if you guys are down for certain things and it's healthy and you're okay with it, that's fine. It's when you start to feel like you have to do it in order to make your partner happy, or your partner is making you do it, that's when it becomes a problem. So, has everybody seen this? Right? So everybody's familiar with this? So this, of course, is what we call the power and control wheel. And it gets a little bit into the dynamics of domestic violence, but also to why people stay in domestic violence situations, which we're going to sort of unpack a little bit later. But there's intimidation, which everybody knows has to do with sort of the physicality of it, the destroying of property, making you afraid, hitting you, the coercions and the threats, economic abuse, using money against you, using your children against you, the gaslighting, which is really big. You know, it's not that bad, why are you overreacting, you made me do it, the isolation, and then of course, you know, male privilege, which, you know, has to do a lot with how we define our roles, and a lot of times when we're looking at traditional relationships, women feel like they have to be kind of subservient to their husbands, right? Their husbands rule the roost. This is not so much anymore in 2019, but there's still kind of some prevailing kind of feelings behind that. So, we actually like to think of it, though, not so much as a power and control wheel, but as a wave, right? And that's because there are ebbs and flows to it. There's no cookie cutter way to look at domestic violence. The good times sometimes are really, really good. The bad times sometimes are really, really bad. And the threat is that it's threatening to kind of wipe you out. So that's kind of our analogy. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the cycles of violence. So it starts with the tension building phase. And so from the victim's point of view, the victim may start to feel antsy because they know something's going to happen and they're walking on eggshells. They'll either try to appease the batterer, or sometimes they'll even start the fight because they just want to get it over with, right? So you might have clients who the police will come and they'll say, okay, but your client was the aggressor. Yes, they were the aggressor, but sometimes they were an aggressor because they already know the signs of what the person's doing, and so it's sort of a self-defense mechanism where they're trying to defend themselves and just kind of get it over with. And then from the abuser's point of view, they're picking the fight, they're acting possessive or jealous, they're criticizing the victim, they might start to drink or use drugs, you know, more than usual. It's just they're really gearing up for the abuse. And then the explosion will happen, and that's when the victim is in pain. They might feel ashamed or humiliated or degraded, depending on what type of abuse. They might try to leave. Does anybody know the number, typically the number of times it takes a victim of domestic violence to leave before it sticks?
7.
7, yes, I love you guys. 7 times, right? So it typically takes a person 7 times to leave. So since you guys already know that, you understand that it's not an easy thing to do. It's not just as easy as just walking out the door. It really takes someone a lot before they're finally willing to end that relationship. And so we go into what we call the honeymoon phase, which you can imagine everything is wonderful, the abuser is giving you gifts, they love you, they're over attentive, it'll never happen again, and then the victim will want to believe that things can get better, or sometimes they're just so beat down by the abuse that it's just like, okay, I'm just glad it's not happening right now, you know, let's just, you know, things are good, let's just try to, you know, keep it this way. So, there are several types of abuse, and understand that physical harm is generally the last stage of domestic abuse, and I think you guys understand this because you were throwing out all the different types of abuse, but it's really hard for a lot of people because unless you have bruises on you, a lot of people don't believe that you're being abused in a lot of different ways. Right, so physical abuse is the big one. Of course, the hitting, the punching, it's when the batterer uses a show of physical strength to cower and intimidate his or her partner. So that's the big one. Another one is sexual abuse. So when I say sexual abuse, what is it you guys think of? Rape. Yes, right? Rape. That's the big one. But it's also any type of unwanted touching, right? And that, you know, is, it has to do with, no, come on, baby, give me a kiss. Like, I don't want to give you a kiss, you know? Like, come sit in my lap. I don't want to sit in your lap, right? And women do this too, right? It's not just men. Sometimes women get a little bit too touchy-feely, you know, with guys, you know, that they're involved with and they don't necessarily want it. It also has to do sort of with what we call sexual coercion. Has anybody heard that phrase before? And so that's when, let's say you want to have consensual sex with somebody, but you want them to wear a condom and they refuse, which means that they're opening you up to not only STIs but unwanted pregnancies. Or if they are tampering with your birth control and you don't know what's going on. That's a form of sexual abuse as well. Or they're making you do things, right? Like, you don't have to have this threesome, right? But if you don't have it, I'll find somebody else that will, right? Nobody put a gun to your head to have it, but you start to feel intimidated. Like, if I don't do these things sexually for my partner, I'm going to lose them. Different things like that. Emotional abuse. So that's the non-physical behaviors such as threats, insults, you know, humiliation, intimidation. So this one is a big one. Does anybody know why?
No signs.
Right? Right, so there's no signs of abuse, right? It's all happening mentally. And for the longest time, we were told, what? Sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt us, right? But that's not particularly true. Emotional abuse will stay with you long after the bruises heal, and a lot of times will even follow you into your next relationship. Financial abuse, right? This is another big one. So typically when I say financial abuse, people think of, oh, they're being taken care of by the abuser, which is one way. But another way is they don't work, right? You work. But they know that on the 15th and the 30th, you're going to get that check, and you better hand that check over, and they're going to decide how much of that money, if any, that you get. Also, it might be a thing too where people get accustomed to a certain type of lifestyle. So the person that they're with, you know, they can buy them this big house, this car, manicure, pedicure, and they're controlling them that way. Spiritual abuse. Have you guys heard about this one? So this is a fairly new one that we're talking about now. Traditionally, it's people think of it as, you know, when people manipulate, you know, certain scriptures, right, to get you to obey your husband and different things like that. It can also look like you forcing somebody else to practice your religion so that they'll be bound by those religious norms. Forcing the children to be raised in that faith. So they sort of act like a check on you, right? Another thing is that sometimes the abusers are jealous or paranoid and they don't want you to practice your faith because, first of all, they don't want you to get solace out of it, right, because they're terrorizing you. And two, they're afraid that maybe you might open up to somebody in the church community, so they'll try to keep you from going to church. That's another thing as well. All right, digital abuse. This one is huge. This is huge because today, in our age of social media, this is how people are getting abused the most. It is the fastest growing way. It's the use of technologies or social media platforms or apps to intimidate or harass. So it's demanding your password to see what it is you're doing on your phone or any of your accounts. Cyberbullying. For a while, this is not happening as much because Facebook is not what it used to be, but abusers used to either get your password and put fake pictures or things on your Facebook account, or they would create fake Facebook accounts to follow you, or they would create fake Facebook accounts to humiliate you, where they would post different pictures. Sexting, everybody knows what that is, right? That's the thing. You know, I always tell people to really think long and hard about doing it because once the picture is out there, it's out there. But, you know, there's a threat that, you know, if you break up with me, I'm going to put these videos and these pictures online. So that's also a big thing as well. Okay, so the biggest question I always get asked whenever I do this is, why do people stay, right? Why do they stay? Because if that was me and they looked at me cross-eyed, I would leave, right? But it's important to understand that, you know, it's not you. And when you're working with clients, you have to be empathetic to what they're going through without judging them, right? And so people stay for a variety of reasons. Lack of financial resources is a big one. Threats of murder. So does everybody know that the most dangerous time for your clients is when they leave the abuse, right? Because the abuser has nothing left to lose, And so when you're watching TV and you hear somebody who has acid thrown in their face, or they've gotten shot, or they've gotten kidnapped, they've already left, right? And the abuser has come after them because they have nothing else left to lose. So that's why it's not as simple as just, you should just walk out the door. Like, you have to have a safety plan. You have to have somewhere to go. You have to have people that you can trust. Social stigma, depending on how your society views marriage or divorce. Immigration issues. What if that particular person is the person who is going to help you get your visa? Self-blame. A lot of times you blame yourself, or it's something that you've done or something that you could do differently. And this is really big. Never underestimate your client's desire to keep their family together. Like, if they have grown up without a family and they want to give that family unit, they will do whatever they have to keep that parent in the home, right? Because they feel like they're doing right by their kids. And sometimes they even feel like it's a sacrifice. Oh, they hit me, but they don't hit the kids, right? So they take that on. And then lack of information. They don't know where to go. They don't know who they can reach out to. So that's a big one as well. All right, key factors cited by those who left abusive relationships. They have had they become empowered, right? They learn. This may sound really crazy, but it's the truth. You're going to come in contact with a lot of people who are victims of domestic violence who don't even know they're victims of domestic violence, because the behavior has been so normalized, right? They've had it in all their relationships. Maybe their mom might have been in it, their aunt. So when you're coming to them like, this is abusive, this is wrong, they're looking at you like you're crazy. Because it's like, no, it's just the way that life is, or the way things always been, or he's just over dramatic, he's just, you know, or she's, you know, she just loves me so much, right? And so it's important to understand that this is how they have rationalized staying in this relationship for so long. Okay. And to that end, when you're having a conversation with your clients and they may be in denial about if they're in domestic violence situations, these are some of the things that maybe you want to talk to them about. Like, well, I noticed that you have some bruises and some injuries. You know, does that happen often? Like, you know, they'll lie to you sometimes, you know, but if you continue the conversation, oh, you have another bruise, like what's going on? You know, eventually, you know, they'll open up to you. Another thing is, how does the person talk to you? Because a lot of times people feel like if they're shouting at you or if they're belittling you, again, that's not domestic violence. And it's kind of like, well, how do you feel when they call you stupid? Do you think you deserve that? You know? If you have a client that comes to you and it's like, I'm sorry I missed my appointment, but, you know, Todd, you know, got really mad and took my phone and threw it up against the wall and broke it. You know, that's not healthy behavior. So, you know, you can talk to them about that, or, you know, he threatened to kill my pet, right? So I didn't want to leave Fifi alone because I love Fifi so much, right? These are conversations that you can have with them, like, well, you know, how did that make you feel? Different things. And you guys aren't counselors, so I'm not expecting you to be counselors, but it's just to get your client to start to think about, you know what, maybe some of this stuff isn't normal, you know? And then asking them about, well, you know, are they possessive when you go out? Do they make you check in a lot? Do they not want you around your friends or coworkers? You know, different things like that, just to really start to get them to thinking about the situation that they're in. And also another thing too is asking them, do you have access to money? Do you have to ask for money, right? Do they give you an allowance? Can you use your phone and your computer when you want to? Just different things like that. So it's just things to just kind of think about when you're trying to get them to see that they're in abusive relationships. And the most important thing too is to be empathetic. Okay, a lot of times, and you guys have talked to people, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know, they'll blame themselves. I did this, it's my fault, if only I had done this, he's just really great, you just don't know her, she's so wonderful, right? And it's one of those things where you just kind of listen, you know, and you let them vent, and you don't try to fix it, because you can't fix it. And I even tell you, don't even try to understand it. I've done this work for 13 years, and I don't understand why people stay in domestic violence. But I do know that I don't have to understand it, I just have to be there, and I have to provide services. And have to help them any way that I can. and I have to get out of myself and out of my ego and not judge. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about working with communities of color. So I'm sure you guys have had a lot of cultural competency sessions, so I'm not going to go really deep into that, but I'm just going to do some of the highlights. It's really important to recognize and be aware of your own biases and prejudice, and this is really hard because it takes a lot of self-reflection. And this has to do with everybody. Like, I have this saying that, like, skin folk doesn't equal kinfolk, right? So I don't think that just because I'm black and you're black, I know how you need to be serviced, because we've had different experiences, right? It's this understanding of I've lived my life a certain way, I feel a certain way about things, but I can't let that, you know, reflect how I see you and how I service you. Because a lot of times, you know, you may think in the back of your head, nobody has to respond to this. They don't need to get their kids back. You know, they've been in this domestic violence situation, you know, maybe the judge needs to take their kids and all that other kind of stuff, but you gotta push that back, right? You have to push that down and be, you know, there for your client and be empathetic for them. Because you have to consider their unique experiences and what it is that got them there. Also, it's really important to have bilingual and multicultural staff that really makes clients feel more at ease. And these two are pretty much the same when you talk about building trusting relationships with the community and developing outreach. So a lot of times, your clients will see you as part of the system. And you are on their team, and you are working for them, and you might feel like they're treating you like the enemy, and you just don't get it, you don't understand it. And that's because they have had horrible experiences with the system in the past, and they just don't trust you. And it takes a while to develop that trust. There may be a fear of law enforcement. I'm sure you guys know the statistics with the mandatory dual arrest law, that if the police come into the home and they cannot identify who the dominant aggressor is, they'll either take both of you to jail, or again, if you're defending yourself and the abuser has all these bruises and you don't, they'll take you to jail. And that happens a lot to women of color. They have disproportionate arrest and incarceration rate due to DV, and the other thing that's a big one is that they're afraid of losing their kids, right? We did a lot of good things in DV with changing the law, but one of the unintended consequences was that because children are considered to be equal victims of domestic violence, as you guys know, if the police come into the home and they feel like it's a dangerous situation, they'll take the kids, as you guys know, because this is the population that you work with. And so they are definitely afraid of calling the police, and they're definitely afraid sometimes of working with you because they're not really sure if you're working for them or if you're working for the people trying to take their kids. And then there's also a fear of homelessness. A lot of times people think of domestic violence and homelessness as two separate issues, which is not the case. If you look at the 2010 Federal Strategic Plan and to Prevent and End Homelessness, 80% of the women who were studied said they were homeless because of DV. So a lot of times you're going to run into homeless clients as well. And you know, you guys aren't social workers, so you can't be expected to provide all these services for them, which is why Genesee is here, and you know that we're a resource, but sometimes, you know, it might take a little bit of extra mile to know, hey, if I'm going to help my client get their kids back, I'm going to have to make sure they get somewhere stable. So, you know, maybe I can reach out to a Genesee to make sure that they have a stable place to live and people that are going to be on their team. Also, sometimes victims of domestic violence have mental health issues. They have anxiety, they have trauma, they have post-traumatic stress disorder, and they just cannot function. So when you're trying to talk to them and you're trying to get them to talk about their case, and they may just start crying, or they may become angry, or they may not answer you in the way that you want them to act, it is because they have all of this trauma and they just cannot articulate to you what is going on. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they have all this untreated trauma and they can't. So it's important that when you're working with your clients that you unpack your clients' experiences, you understand the influence that their values and cultural norms play in their life, You understand the role a client's upbringing plays and how they behave and react to you, which is really important, because sometimes they might like look at you and you might remind them of their 4th grade teacher, and their 4th grade teacher was always mean to them. And you're just like, I'm trying to help, and they're just like attacking you and you don't know why. And this is like little stories. Like we've had case managers where we've had clients who, it's like, why don't you like that person? Oh, they reminded me of so-and-so I grew up with. And every time I look at them, I just get mad. And it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with their experiences and their unpacked trauma. So that's important to understand too. And I always have like a little, what I call, a little saying, understanding plus communication equals better advocacy. I know that's super corny, but it is true. And so now I'm going to hand off to Charmin, who's going to talk a little bit more about what the clients go through at Genesee and how we help them be able to better articulate what is going on with them when they're dealing with you.
Okay, so can you hear me? Is it on? Is it on? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll read this. The trauma-informed care, DV, is a unique type of a trauma because victims live in it. They wake up in it. They go to sleep in it for years. A person who is doing the abuse is because the person that's doing the abuse is claiming to love them. So trauma-informed care is really, really important, because most of your clients that will come to you, they won't trust you, and trust is a huge issue. So if you have your client, make your client feel safe, and through that safety, through them feeling safety, they'll begin to trust you. So trauma-informed care is basically you being able to, tell me, how am I clicking this? Oh, wrong way. So trauma-informed care is basically you just assuming that every client you work with, that everyone you come in contact with has had some form of trauma. When you can assume that, then you are meeting people where they are. You're understanding their behaviors through understanding that trauma has a part in the way they see the world. What Angela talked about, how sometimes your clients may not be able, because of trauma, they may not be able to articulate to you their feelings and their fears and why their behaviors are the way they are. But it's because of trauma. We see trauma-informed care allows services to be delivered in a way that avoids inadvertently re-traumatizing your client. So if you understand trauma, you understand that everyone has experienced different levels of trauma, you'll understand that the behaviors of your clients is stemming from something that they have experienced. DV is a very unique form of trauma. Domestic violence is, because it's not like, we can be in a car accident, or you can witness a murder, or your family can be killed, and you have that trauma. But domestic violence is a trauma that you wake up in every day. You go to sleep in this trauma. You live in this trauma. You have these fears and anxieties and things of that nature that you live with every single day. And some women and men, they live in this for years. And it affects the way they see the world. It affects how they communicate with people. And so you may have a client that you're thinking to yourself, I'm working so hard to help this person. Why are they showing up late? Why are they not going to the appointments I'm telling them to go to? And it's because of trauma. It's because sometimes they'll self-sabotage themselves. Sometimes they'll be afraid to go to places. Like Angela said, that sometimes they don't know if you're working for them. Depending on which clients you have, they may think that they see you as a part of the system, and that system has not always been so good in their understanding. In terms of I guess new laws regarding domestic violence, when if you call 911 or you call to get help, a victim calls. When they call, if they have children, a report is automatically generated to DCFS. So now moms are wondering, do I call the police and risk losing my children, or do I just stay? Do I risk losing my life? And most times they'll pick their children. So if you understand your client's trauma, you're better able to advocate for them. You're better able to understand why they do the things that they do, which is really, really serious and significant. Oh. Did I cut it out? Oh, what was that, the last slide or no? So, it was a few questions that about trauma was asked, and it was how do you relate to a client, and what do they learn in the classes at Genesee? And so a lot of what the clients learn, they learn the development, the psychosocial development of their children during parenting classes. They learn the different levels of the child's developmental life, and they learn to parent at that level with the child, so they know what a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old need. They know what a 6-year-old and a 7 and an 8-year-old child needs from them as a parent, and they're able to talk to these children and just better parent, and they should be able to articulate that need in the classes. We have anger management classes, domestic violence, and domestic violence with child, which is a different domestic violence because we really touch on children and how this affects them. Sometimes parents, they think that this is just about, you know, the two parents, and it's not. The children are affected just as much. And so we talked about DV being a unique type of trauma, and a lot of times, well, most times, folks dealing with domestic violence will have post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's just like when, you know, when we saw the troops come home from Vietnam, they had lived in that trauma for years sometimes. And they had, you know, they just festered in that trauma. It was their daily life. And that's what DV is. It's a trauma that they live in day after day. And it actually becomes normal to them. A lot of times it does. So that when a domestic violence victim they're ready to leave, they have to now relearn how to live. How do I make money? How do I go to school? How do I parent? And it can be just as overwhelming once they leave that relationship as it is inside of it, because now they have to learn a new normal. I think so. That's the last slide. So I think so. Just touching on trauma-informed care, and I think that's going to be huge with how you interact with your clients. Understanding that way, you're not frustrated. You're not saying, "How do you not get this?" Right? You're not understanding how I'm trying to get your children back. You say you love them, and you don't show up at this appointment. And it's about trauma. It's about the fear of being here. It's about the fear of listening to a judge or someone else saying, "I'm not getting my children back," and they are just stuck in the middle of this trauma. So trauma-informed care is first and foremost about safety. If you have that client and you help them to feel safe, and you talk to them, understanding their needs, they will then begin to trust you. It's first about safety. Yes.
Does the Genesee Center address drug use also? I imagine that there are instances where individuals come in, there's an overlap between domestic violence and drug use by the victims. Do you guys also offer programs to address that as well?
Well, we do. We have substance abuse case managers. Our counselors are well versed in substance abuse, and we teach substance abuse classes. If there was a person coming in and they really was you know, so far gone and they need to detox or things of that nature, we will refer them out to a place where they would need to be. But yeah, we do. We have services for substance abuse as well.
There's this. Okay, there is this notion that victims of domestic violence would usually in their subsequent relationship seek out somebody that would have the same tendency. Some of us do not necessarily agree with that, but based on your experience, is that really a true concept? Because the bench and some attorneys factor that in counseling their client or making determination as to how they view the case.
You know, that's a great question, and that's one of the things that we teach at Genesee, and we teach our clients to not go back into those relationships, but statistics will show that most people that are in domestic violence relationships, they're in those relationships over and over again, and they watch their parents in those relationships, and they have normalized what that life. You know, it's okay for me to be treated a certain way for comfort, because I want to keep my family together, or so that I can have a roof over my head. They normalize these behaviors, and they find themselves in these relationships, you know, one after the other. It's pretty true.
Okay, so I have a question. A lot of our work requires us to ask our clients to relive a lot of their trauma. How would you advise us to go about, because we need to get obviously certain answers from them. We have questions and we need answers, so how do we go about asking them to relive that trauma in a sensitive enough way that we get the answers we want from them?
So relive it in terms of just because you're asking them what happened.
Correct.
And that just goes back to trauma-informed care, right? It's the difference with you saying, if you're a doctor, for instance, here, I need you to come in here and take these tests, opposed to you saying, I need you to take this specific test because I want to see if this happened to you, and you explain things to them, and you say, this is why I need to know that information. With trauma-informed care, if you get that client to feel safe, and they feel safe with you, they will open up to you. And then you, again, I know you're not a therapist, but you can say, hey, since we're reliving this, and you know, I'm having you talk, maybe you can go and talk to a counselor, a therapist, or somewhere, you know, somewhere to seek services. But having that client to feel safe with you makes a real difference.
So one of the things you were talking about earlier with the power and control wheel and talking about using kids kind of as pawns in this sort of cycle, keeping that in mind, do you have any suggestions for how we can explain to our clients the court's orders in terms of this is what you have to do if you want to keep your kids, because it kind of harkens back to maybe some of the abuse that they've had in their relationship?
So, and I guess you'll hear this from me over and over again. It's trauma-informed care. So if you understand why these folks are doing the things that they're doing, so you understand their fears, right? And when you get a client that will trust you, they will open up to you. They will begin to meet you at where you are. They will begin to show up and do the things that they're supposed to do because they believe that you are working to help them. A lot of times the parents are just thinking, I just want my children back. They don't know that there's these steps and this road you have to take. All they know is someone took my children, and now they're going to tell me how to get them back and when I can see them. They don't understand that. They just understand I want my children. But when they feel safe, if they're in a space where they can feel safe, I think you can get them to better understand, I know this is not the best or ideal time for you, but if you let me help you, right, if they trust that you'll help them, they will open up to you and begin to make the moves that need to be made to get their children back. Because a lot of times parents feel like everyone is against them, from the judge to the attorneys on the other side to their own attorneys sometimes. Because sometimes we don't understand trauma, so we don't understand what it does and what it is, and we treat everyone like this. This is my client, this is what I need you to do, bam, bam, bam. And everyone can't understand bam, bam, bam. They need you to sit and explain every intricate detail to them so that they feel safe, so they understand why they're doing the things that they need to do.
I know your caseloads are extremely heavy, but to the extent that you can connect your clients with places like Genesee Center, who have the services to provide them support and empower them, ultimately that makes your job easier. Because if they are getting help for the trauma that they have experienced, then that helps them to focus on the steps that they need to take when they're working with you and the courts to get their children back. And so, working collaboratively with outside partners if need be is really, really important, I think, when working with this population.
What are your programs and guidelines to taking clients? Because one thing that I think attorneys see most often is like a problem with clients like recanting. Oftentimes, I mean, they do an interview between the first hearing and the trial, and they'll say completely different things, and it's really difficult for us to get them in services or you know what I mean, like kind of piggybacking off of what Rachel said, like how do we, well first what are the guidelines, and then how do we deal with like them recanting so often?
That's a good one. So in terms of Genesee Center and our guidelines for accepting clients, all we require is that they self-certify as a victim of domestic violence. We don't require them to have a police report. We don't require them to go out and get a restraining order. We take them, for lack of a better term, at their word that they are victims of domestic violence. And assuming then that we have space in our shelter programs if they're looking for shelter and they're not in their danger zone, our shelter is not in their danger zone, then more often than not, we will accept that individual or that family into our program. The recanting issue is a huge one. I understand your frustration as a litigator. I think if they are, if they're connected with a program like Genesee Center where they are getting education about what is domestic violence, what are the dynamics of domestic violence, because as was touched on earlier, a lot of your clients may not see themselves as victims of DV. Maybe because they resisted and they fought back, they don't see themselves in the victim role, that they don't recognize that the relationship they were in is an unhealthy one or one that's characterized as a domestic violence relationship. So I think the recanting issue is minimized when, while you're working with them on the legal side, they're also receiving programs, classes, services that are educating and empowering them around the trauma they've experienced and helping them to recognize what it is they've gone through.
Thank you. In regards to the guidelines to get into your program, is there a time frame? Sometimes our clients find barriers if there hasn't been an incident within the last 3 months or even a month, then a shelter won't take them in.
We don't throw up those kind of barriers to entry. If they have been a victim of domestic violence and they are in need of shelter as a result thereof. Even if the DV happened a year ago, we've had clients come in, you know, who 5 years ago experienced domestic violence and then they ended up homeless, and so they've been on the streets for the last 5 years, but the root cause of it was them experiencing domestic violence. We've accepted those kinds of clients into our program.
If they recant, you kick them out, ask them to nicely leave, because then are they basically saying, I don't need to be here because for whatever reasons I told a lie? You then try to tell them the importance of, I can't help you unless you really tell me the truth, and maybe you're scared, that's why you're recanting. But if they say, no, I made it up because whatever reason, do you then say, I'm sorry, you have to leave? And does that happen sometimes?
I don't recall a situation where we've asked someone to leave because, so when you talk about recanting, if you're saying they're recanting for court purposes, not because they're not really a victim of DV, but they're minimizing the abuse, they don't want to get the abuser in trouble, they don't want to be involved in the court process, that's one form of recanting that may not lead to them being asked to leave our program. But if you had someone who says, I'm not really domestic violence, I don't need these services, I was just homeless and needed some place to stay, that's someone that we might connect with a more general homeless program versus one that specifically
No, they're
focused on
saying,
DV.
I made up a lie, it did not happen, I was mad at him for some stupid reason, I wanted to teach him a lesson. Basically, they're saying whatever they said the first time is 180 degrees opposite of what they're saying. The second time they interview, which puts us in a really awkward position because this court wants clients to be honest, because if you're not honest, then how do you get the resources and really participate and learn what you did? So if I come into you and say he did this A, B, C, and D, then I tell the social worker, no, I made it up because I was just mad at him, he's a wonderful to me, he treats me well. She's lying, you find out about it, or she tells you what you do, that's our type of recantation. You know, so have you had those situations and then you've been able to say, through therapy, are you really sure you're recanting because you're now scared or he's threatening you? Then I would imagine you keep them. But otherwise, do you say, it's been nice meeting you, but I can't help you?
We have not actually had a situation that I can recall like that, where, you know, a client, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is they're saying one thing to the social worker, which then impacts your ability to effectively represent them.
Different from the first time they were.
Different from the first
when they
time.
were really scared and really abused and were covered in bruises. Now, oh my God, I bumped into a wall, he didn't touch me. That type of, you know, they can find reasons
Right.
because they're so scared and they've been involved in this situation. I'm just curious, how do you deal in that situation?
From our perspective, you know, we're going to do a lot more work with that client to determine whether or not the recantation is genuine in terms of that never really actually happened, or if this is a result of continuing fear, trauma, etc. So that scenario in and of itself is not going to be automatic grounds for us to ask a client to leave. I think it's going to be a situation where we're doing a lot more work with that client to really try to unpack what's going on. And that's why we utilize a multidisciplinary approach at Genesee Center. And, you know, once a week, all of our different departments come together and we bring each family figuratively into the room, and we're discussing their progress. What are the trends that are bubbling up? What are they telling legal versus what are they telling case management, so that we're all on the same page in terms of how we're helping this family to move forward.
Because also the social workers, I'm sure, interview you when our clients are there because they want to get input from the different various.
They interview our case managers, yes,
Yeah.
about that client's progress, absolutely.
But I think that's one of the things we've worked really hard to do, is to form a relationship with them. A lot of DV organizations, they think that they're the enemy, right? But that's crazy because they have our kids. And so one of the things that we've really done is work to form a really great relationship with them, so that oftentimes when clients say, oh, I'm at Genesee, then it's like, oh, okay, we've been to Genesee, right? And we know that we can start the process of giving you your child back because they'll be safe there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, one more question. Can one of you please just briefly explain what our clients, if they're ordered to do this domestic violence program for victims, because that's what all of our DV survivors are ordered to do. Can you just explain briefly like what they can expect when they go to that class? What's the format? What happens?
So the classes that we offer are, the classes we offer different classes, and so parenting classes are usually classes that when they have an open DCFS case, parenting classes, domestic violence with children. And what we do is, so the classes are built for empowerment, right? The ladies share their stories. They learn from the clinicians in the room, and we work on understanding how to be a mother. Sometimes they don't know how to be parents. We work on understanding your child and what you can expect from them and what they need from you. Like I said, the developmental stages of the children. With domestic violence, and we teach them the triggers. Sometimes they have anger issues because they have been dealing with domestic violence for so long, they're angry too. So the class is more of, is formed in terms of like a group. And the ladies count on one another. They share their stories, so that the next lady coming in, she's not thinking she's isolated and you know, it was just her. They share their stories with one another, and they learn how to be better mothers. They learn how to not go back in that type of relationship. They learn what domestic violence is, and they learn to advocate for themselves and communicate their needs. So they learn, the class is structured for empowering and helping them to be better parents and to advocate for themselves, and they learn that this is not their fault, that the domestic violence was not caused by anything that was done by them. They, you know, unfortunately found themselves, and it could be a generational cycle. So we try to break that.
Do you have like 12 steps, like if you're an alcoholic or a drug abuser, you know how they have like the 12 step? Do they, I know they have a cycle of violence, but is there something when you're in these support groups that they can like go, if they feel like they're getting in the same type of relationship, they look at their steps and reinforce, and you go through the steps? Is there anything like that in these domestic violence support groups, or is it just?
Well, in terms of, yeah, looking at the relationships that you go in, we do. We talk about the relationships. We talk about why, and try to figure out with the clients and teach them why they gravitate to this type of relationship. And we talk about what dating looks like and what it's supposed to look like and what a healthy relationship is. So, I mean, in that way, it's not a 12-step. The 12 steps, I don't think it's kind of the same.
I just wondered if DV ever had anything similar, so parents know.
Right.
They should have.
Yeah,
I have a question.
Can you maybe explain, is it a guided conversation amongst the ladies, and what are some of the topics? If I'm coming for DV education classes, because I'm court mandated to take that, what are some of the topics that are going to be covered in the group, and then how do you gauge whether or not the clients have grasped those topics?
Right. Okay. So some of the topics. We do topics every hour. We do a different class basically, and so in the DV class, for instance, we talk about, and sometimes it is guided. Sometimes we're working on a worksheet, or sometimes we're watching, doing a PowerPoint like this, and we interact. It's always interactive, so it's never sort of we're teaching and they're just sitting. It's always interactive, but we talk about, we listen to the ladies in the room and see what it is they need. So when they bring up a problem that they've had, or a relationship that they're in, we go with that discussion, and we talk about how they found themselves in that relationship, and what did that look like, and other ways that they can now navigate getting out of that relationship, or just a warning sign, red flags of an unhealthy relationship.
Question. Does a 12-week domestic violence, or 26-week domestic violence, or 52-week domestic violence ordered by the court have any meaning to your agency, or do you have a different protocol in determining goal and reaching that goal?
He's asking when they're court ordered to do a 26-week or 12-week domestic violence education class. What does that mean for Genesee?
Okay, I'm sorry, I could not hear you. So most of our clients that come, especially if they have an open case, they do have to have 26 weeks. The DCFS, they'll tell us, or in their minute order, we'll know how many classes they'll have to have before they get a certificate in anger management or parenting or things of that nature. And they come to classes every week. We offer classes from 9 every hour, an hour from 9 to 4. So, and it's pretty much 5 days a week that we offer classes. And I'm probably, I don't know if I'm answering this, but are you saying is it 26 weeks? Is it like a continuum?
No, whether the client could meet the goal before 26 weeks. Does the court order have to really say 26 weeks when the client already met the goal in 12 weeks, 16 weeks? Do you guys really need that specific order?
Okay,
That's what we grapple with here.
I see what you're saying, and it's kind of like what Allison asked, and it's how we measure if they're getting it. So when a client, the first few weeks and you know, classes that they go to, we sit there and we watch them grow. We watch their conversations get better and grow, and then we have quiz questions that we may have them come answer when they first get there about you know, depending on the client, before they get receiver, by the time it's time to receive a certificate, they can answer every question on there. Most of our clients, by the time it can be before the 26 weeks, and let's say they've met that goal before, they're still interactive in that class, and they're helping the ones that are new that's coming in. So they kind of step up as leaders, and they enjoy the classes, they like to come.
And so to piggyback on what she's saying, the way we approach it is if a client has a court order that they have to take 26 weeks of classes, we follow that, and what we're going to do is give them proof that they attended 26 classes. So we go by the letter of the order. We don't deviate from it, and we don't substitute our judgment for what the court order says, because at the end of the day, we want our clients to get their children back. And we try to be flexible because every client is different. Clients are ordered to do different things, so we try to build in flexibility into our program so that what they're getting from us is going to be what the court is looking for in terms of making a decision about returning their children.
Thank you. Are you able to take clients in right away, or is there a waiting list?
Typically, we don't have more than a 2-week waiting list. The wait usually comes because they have to go through what's called an intake process. Once they are through with their intake, they can begin taking classes right away. We don't have like hard starts and stops for our classes. They're ongoing. So a client can jump in to a class at any point once they have completed the intake process. Typically, there's about a 7 to 14 day wait period between them calling and getting an appointment for intake.
Is it only inpatient, or can they like reside at their house and come to your program to take classes?
We have a drop-in center, so it's specific to our clients who need everything we have to offer except shelter.
And we service about anywhere between 80 to 100 drop-in clients a year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I didn't grab one of those things. Okay, go grab one.
Yeah, we'll give it to you.
I'll go.
Sorry. There you go. Thanks, Jennifer.